The event coordinator's voice cut across the registration table like a blade. "Sir, this area is for military families only." Ezra Whitfield didn't move. His daughter's small hands gripped his hair, her cardboard crown tilting as she craned to see the bounce houses beyond the checkpoint. What the coordinator didn't know, what nobody at that Family Day celebration knew, was that the man in the tire shop t-shirt had once held a dying teammate in a compound that officially never existed. And in exactly 14 minutes, a 2-star general would be on his knees. Ezra shifted Maisie's weight on his shoulders, his hands steadying her legs with an economy of motion that seemed out of place for a man in faded jeans and scuffed work boots. The shirt he wore advertised a 24-hour tire service in National City, the logo cracked and peeling from 100 wash cycles. His jaw was stubbled. His eyes were tired. And to Sarah Chun, the volunteer coordinator who had been screening family for the past 3 hours, he looked exactly like the kind of person who didn't belong here. "I have an invitation," Ezra said quietly. His voice was soft, almost hoarse, as if speaking cost him something. "My daughter was invited by the Morrison family. Petty Officer Morrison's kids go to school with Maisie." Sarah glanced at her clipboard, then back at the man. She noted the way other families were giving him space, the subtle drift of bodies away from his position in line. She noted the promotional shirt, the boots held together with what looked like electrical tape, the general air of someone who had stopped caring about appearances a long time ago. "Do you have military ID?" she asked. "My dependent ID expired when I separated." Sarah's pen tapped against the clipboard. Separated. The word hung between them. She had heard every story in the book. Contractors claiming access. Estranged spouses trying to crash events. Men who bought their clothes at surplus stores and their stories from the internet. "Sir, I'm going to need to verify your status before I can let you through." She reached for her radio. "Let me call someone from security." "Daddy," Maisie whispered, her voice small. "Can't we just go play?" Ezra's hand found hers and squeezed. "We will, sweetheart. Just give them a minute." He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, Maisie on his shoulders, waiting with the kind of patience that comes from having waited in far worse places for far longer. His eyes moved once across the checkpoint, cataloging exits and sight lines, and then settled back on Sarah with something that might have been understanding. The security team arrived in 60 seconds. 2 men in polo shirts with base security badges, their postures suggesting they expected trouble. The taller one, a former Marine by the look of his haircut, positioned himself to Ezra's left. The shorter one hung back, hand resting near his radio. "Sir, we're going to need you to step out of line." Ezra complied without protest. He moved to the side, keeping Maisie elevated, keeping his movements slow and visible. The families behind him shuffled forward, grateful for the resolution. A few shot him sympathetic looks. Most didn't look at all. "This is a military installation," the tall security guard said. "If you can't verify your status, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I understand," Ezra said. "I just wanted my daughter to see the bounce houses. She's been asking for months." The guard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Doubt maybe, or recognition of something he couldn't quite place. The way this man held himself, the way he positioned his daughter, the way his eyes never stopped moving even when his body was perfectly still. The commotion had drawn attention. Families paused their progress toward the festivities. Children pointed. Parents whispered. And from across the registration area, a man in dress uniform noticed the gathering crowd and saw an opportunity. Major General Franklin Hurst had spent 30 years climbing the military ladder, and he had learned that every interaction was either a rung up or a rung down. He was visiting from SOCOM headquarters in Tampa, touring bases for what his staff called a morale initiative and what everyone else recognized as a campaign for his 3rd star. His aide walked 2 steps behind him. His photographer walked 2 steps behind that. Every handshake, every smile, every moment of manufactured concern was documented for posterity and promotion boards. "What seems to be the trouble here?" Hurst said as he approached. His voice carried the practiced warmth of a politician, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. His eyes swept over Ezra's appearance and made their calculations in an instant. "Sir," The security guard straightened. This gentleman is trying to access the event, but can't verify military status. Hurst nodded slowly, his expression settling into something that looked like compassion, but felt like condescension. He turned to Ezra, taking an attire shop shirt, the worn boots, the small girl with the aluminum foil crown. "That's quite a princess you've got there," he said to Maisie. She smiled shyly and adjusted her crown. Hurst's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. He turned back to Ezra. "So, trying to sneak onto a military base, are we?" "No, sir. Just trying to keep a promise to my daughter." Hurst chuckled, glancing at his aide to make sure the moment was being appreciated. "A promise. That's sweet." He clasped his hands behind his back, rocking slightly on his heels. "Tell you what, friend, since you clearly went to a lot of trouble to get your little girl here today, I'll vouch for you personally." He paused, letting the generosity of the gesture sink in for his audience. Then he leaned closer to his aide, his voice carrying just far enough for the surrounding families to hear. Even if Daddy never quite made it into uniform himself, the laughter was quiet but present. A few chuckles from the security team, a snore from the aide. The photographer captured Hurst's beneficent smile. Ezra said nothing. His hands remained steady on his daughter's legs. His expression didn't change, but somewhere behind his eyes, something shifted, something old and cold and patient. Maisie tugged at his hair. "Daddy, can we go to the bounce houses now?" "Yes, sweetheart," Ezra said softly. "We can go now." He walked past the checkpoint, past the smirking general, past the families who had witnessed his humiliation. His daughter chattered about which bounce house she wanted to try first. His boots made no sound on the pavement, and not a single person there understood that they had just watched a two-star general sign his own death warrant. The smell hit him first. Gunpowder and diesel and something else, something that lived in the back of his throat and never quite left. The SEAL demonstration team was running weapons checks near the main stage, and the familiar scent of rifle oil drifted across the family day crowd like a ghost. Ezra stopped walking. His hands tightened on Maisie's legs. "Daddy," she said, "the bounce houses are that way." "I know, sweetheart. Just give me a second." He closed his eyes. The California sun pressed warm against his face, but he was somewhere else now. Somewhere cold and dark and 15,000 miles away. Kunduz Province. March 2016. The compound sat at the base of a ridge, mud walls baking in the Afghan sun. Ezra lay prone on an elevated position 800 meters out, his eye pressed to the scope of his rifle. Beside him, Damon Reeves called wind corrections in a voice barely above a whisper. 2 degrees right. Hold for the gust. Ezra held. His breathing slowed to almost nothing. His heartbeat became a distant drum, each pulse an eternity apart. Below, 7 men from his team were about to breach a door that would either lead to a high-value target or an ambush. The door opened. The ambush came. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 windows. Ezra's finger moved before his conscious mind registered the threat. The first shot dropped a shooter at 847 meters. The second dropped another at 912. By the time Damon finished calling the third correction, Ezra had already fired. "Spectre, Spectre," the radio crackled. "We're taking heavy fire from the north compound." "I see them," Ezra breathed. And then, quieter, almost to himself, "I see everything." 9 shots, 9 kills. For minutes, his team walked out of that compound without a scratch. "Daddy," Maisie's voice pulled him back. Her small hand patted his head. "You're squeezing too tight." Ezra released his grip on her legs. "Sorry, baby. Sorry." He opened his eyes to the California sunshine, to the bounce houses and the cotton candy stands and the families who had never held a dying friend in a place that didn't exist on any map. They found a bench near the bounce house area, and Ezra lifted Maisie down. She immediately sprinted toward the inflatable castle, her cardboard crown bouncing with each step. He watched her go, his hands finding his knees, his breath slowly steadying. The bench was removed from the main crowd. He had chosen it without thinking, positioning himself with a clear view of the exits and an unobstructed sight line to his daughter. Old habits, the kind that never died, no matter how many years passed. A woman approached, pushing a stroller with one hand and holding sunscreen with the other. "You might want this for your little one," she said with a smile. "The California sun is brutal." Ezra looked at her, really looked, searching for the threat that wasn't there. Then he softened. "Thank you. That's kind." She nodded and moved on, never knowing that for a fraction of a second, the tired father on the bench had assessed her as a potential hostile. Never knowing that his hands had shifted to defensive positions before his brain caught up with reality. He sat alone after that. Families clustered in groups around him, parents chatting while children played. He recognized some of the dynamics from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The easy camaraderie of shared experience. The shorthand of military spouses who understood deployments and absences, and the particular loneliness of loving someone who might not come home. He had been part of that once. Elena had been the center of it. The memory came unbidden. Elena at the airport, waiting at the gate when he came home from his 5th deployment. She wore the yellow sundress he loved and held a sign that said, "Welcome home, hero. Now please take out the trash." He had laughed so hard he cried. Or maybe he had just cried. "Come back to me," she used to say every time he left. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The only order he ever followed without question. He came back to her 6 times. 6 deployments, 6 homecomings, 6 moments of holding her so tight he thought they might fuse into a single person. And then came the 7th deployment. Syria, a safe house in a city whose name he wasn't allowed to say. A satellite phone buzzing at 3 in the morning. "Sir," the voice had said, "there's been an accident." The sound that came out of him wasn't human. His teammates thought he'd been hit. They found him on his knees, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to a stranger explain how a drunk driver had run a red light while his wife was picking up their daughter from daycare. Maisie had been in the car. Maisie was fine. Elena was not. He made it back for the funeral. Emergency leave, red-eye flights, a blur of airports and paperwork, and people saying words that meant nothing. He stood at her grave in his dress whites and held Maisie's hand while she asked when Mommy was coming back. "She's not coming back, sweetheart." He couldn't say more than that. Couldn't explain death to a 3-year-old when he couldn't understand it himself. The separation paperwork took 6 weeks. His commanding officer tried to talk him out of it. "Spectre, you're the best shooter we have. The teams need you. My daughter needs me more." They offered him desk jobs, training positions, anything to keep him in. He turned them all down. Elena would have wanted Maisie to have a father, not a flag and a folded letter. So he filed the papers and walked away from 14 years of service and never looked back. That was the lie he told himself, anyway. The truth was he looked back constantly. Every time he heard a helicopter overhead. Every time he smelled gunpowder. Every time he woke at 3 in the morning with his hands reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. "Daddy, look at me." Maisie stood at the entrance of the bounce house, waving frantically. He raised his hand and waved back, forcing a smile that felt like lifting concrete. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his former team leader, now a contractor pulling 6 figures in the private sector. "Heard you're on base. Come say hi. The team misses you." Ezra stared at the message for a long moment. Then he put the phone back in his pocket without responding. He couldn't face them. Not as this. Not as the tire shop guy who had walked away from everything they still believed in. Maisie bounced higher, her crown flying off. She didn't notice, too lost in joy to care about crowns or ceremonies or the father watching from the margins. Ezra retrieved it from the grass and held it in his hands, this fragile thing made of cardboard and aluminum foil, and 3 hours of his time after a double shift. She deserved a real crown. She deserved a real life. She deserved a father who could give her more than a 1-bedroom apartment and a promise that things would get better someday. His fingers found the tattoo under his watch. He didn't need to look at it. He had traced those lines 1,000 times in the dark. Elena's initials, their wedding coordinates. And below that, newer ink that still ached when the weather changed. The coordinates of a compound in Kunduz where his best friend had bled out in his arms. Maisie came running back, face flushed and grinning. "Daddy, can we see the SEAL guys?" She pointed toward the demonstration area where operators in full tactical gear were preparing a capabilities display. "I want to see the cool stuff." Ezra's chest tightened. Some of those men had carried Damon's casket. Some of them didn't know Ezra was still alive. Sure, sweetheart. He stood and lifted her back onto his shoulders. Let's go see the cool stuff. The demonstration area buzzed with controlled energy. Active duty operators moved through equipment stations with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this 1,000 times, breaking down rifles and reassembling them while families watched in fascination. Children pressed against the rope barriers, eyes wide. Parents snapped photos. And in the center of it all, General Hurst worked the crowd like a politician at a fundraiser. Ezra hung back at the edge of the gathering, Maisie still perched on his shoulders. He recognized 3 of the operators immediately. Kowalski, who had been a new guy when Ezra left. Brennan, who owed him $40 from a poker game that never got settled. And Torres, who had held the other side of Damon's casket. None of them looked his way. Why would they? He was just another civilian in a crowd of civilians, invisible in his tire shop shirt and borrowed anonymity. Daddy, look. Maisie pointed at an operator demonstrating a sniper rifle to a group of teenagers. He's got a big gun like in the movies. That's called a rifle, sweetheart. Ezra's voice was distant, mechanical. The weapon was in 13 Malawian kwaches, Mod 7, accurate to 1,800 meters in the right hands. His hands. He had carried one, just like it on the day Damon died. Can you shoot like that? Maisie asked, her voice carrying further than Ezra would have liked. A woman nearby glanced over, amusement flickering across her face. Her husband wore captain's bars on his collar and the easy confidence of an officer who had never seen combat. They exchanged a look that Ezra recognized. The look people gave when a child said something embarrassingly naive. I used to, Ezra said quietly. A long time ago. The captain's wife leaned toward her husband and whispered something. They both smiled. Ezra pretended not to notice. General Hurst's voice boomed across the demonstration area. Now this is what I like to see. Our finest warriors showing the next generation what service looks like. He posed for a photo with 2 operators, his smile wide and practiced. The photographer circled for better angles. Hurst's eyes swept the crowd and landed on Ezra. Recognition flickered, followed by something darker. Satisfaction, maybe. The pleasure of seeing someone in their proper place. Well, Hurst said, breaking away from his handlers and moving toward Ezra's position. If it isn't our friend from Agate. He pitched his voice to Carrie. I see you found the real military members. Taking notes? The families nearby fell silent. The operators at the nearest station paused their demonstration. All eyes turned toward the man in the tire shop shirt. Just watching, sir, Ezra said. My daughter wanted to see the equipment. Her smile widened. He clasped his hands behind his back and rocked on his heels. A gesture Ezra had seen 100 times from officers who confused rank with competence. Of course she did. Every little girl wants to see the heroes, don't they? He looked up at Maisie. Your daddy's not one of those heroes, sweetheart. But maybe one day you'll marry one. Something cold moved behind Ezra's eyes. His hands didn't tighten on Maisie's legs. His posture didn't change, but the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. Maisie's voice piped up, innocent and proud. My daddy can shoot. He told me. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Gentle, patronizing laughter. The kind reserved for children who didn't know any better. I'm sure he can, Hurst said, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. I'm sure he's very good at shooting. He glanced at Ezra's shirt. Tires, probably. More laughter. Louder this time. The captain and his wife joined in. Even one of the operators cracked a smile before catching himself. Ezra said nothing. He stood perfectly still, absorbing the mockery like water hitting stone. His breathing remained slow and even. His eyes remained fixed on a point somewhere beyond the general's shoulder. But someone else was watching now. Master Chief Ramon Vega had been running SEAL Team 3's training program for 6 years. He had seen thousands of men pass through the pipeline, and he had developed an instinct for identifying operators the way some people could identify birds by their songs. It was in the way they moved, the way they held themselves, the way their eyes never stopped cataloging threats, even in the safest environments. The man in the tire shop shirt moved like an operator. Vega set down the rifle he had been demonstrating and drifted toward the edge of the crowd. He positioned himself where he could observe without being noticed, his eyes narrowing as he studied the civilian who had just become the focus of a general's entertainment. The posture was wrong. Wrong for a civilian. The man held himself with a stillness that spoke of training, of discipline, of thousands of hours learning to wait for the perfect shot. His hands rested on his daughter's legs with a light touch that could become a defensive grip in a fraction of a second. His eyes moved in patterns Vega recognized. Entrance. Exit. Threat. Exit. Entrance. Hurst was still talking, still performing for his audience. We have a marksmanship demonstration later. Maybe you should stick around. Learn what real shooting looks like. He winked at the crowd. Something to aspire to, right? The man didn't rise to the bait. He just stood there, silent and still, letting the general's words wash over him like rain. And that was what caught Vega's attention more than anything else. Most civilians would have argued, would have defended themselves, would have done something. This man did nothing, because he had nothing to prove. Vega pulled out his phone and opened the secure personnel database. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. He didn't have a name, didn't have a rank or a service number. Just a face and a hunch and 30 years of instinct screaming that something about this picture was very, very wrong. The general's aide appeared at Hurst's elbow, whispering something about the schedule. Hurst nodded, shot one more condescending smile at Ezra, and moved on to the next photo opportunity. The crowd's attention shifted. The moment passed, but Vega kept watching. The man lowered his daughter from his shoulders and knelt beside her, adjusting her aluminum foil crown with gentle hands. He said something that made her laugh. Then he stood, took her hand, and led her toward a less crowded area of the demonstration. As he turned, his sleeve rode up. Vega saw it for only a second. A flash of ink on the man's inner forearm. Coordinates. A date. And something else. Something partially hidden by grime and faded by time. It looked like a trident. Vega's phone was at his ear before he consciously decided to make the call. He needed the personnel office. He needed records. He needed to know who this man was and why a civilian was walking around a military base with what looked like a SEAL tattoo on his arm. Because if this was stolen valor, Vega would end him. And if it wasn't, then General Hurst had just made himself look like a fool in front of someone who mattered. Ezra found a quiet spot near the perimeter fence, away from the crowds and the demonstrations and the general's traveling circus. Maisie sat on a concrete barrier, kicking her legs and eating a snow cone that had already stained her lips blue. He stood beside her, watching the festivities from a distance, feeling like a ghost at his own funeral. "Daddy, why was that man mean to you?" The question hit harder than any insult Hurst had delivered. Ezra crouched down to her level, his knees protesting from years of hard drops and harder landings. "Some people just are, sweetheart. It's not about us. It's about them. But you didn't do anything wrong." "No, I didn't." Maisie considered this with the gravity only a 6-year-old could muster. "Mommy always said you were brave. She said you helped people." Ezra's throat tightened. He reached out and adjusted her crown, buying time to compose himself. "Your mommy was right about a lot of things. Do you still help people?" The question hung in the air between them. Ezra thought about his job at the tire shop, the double shifts, the customers who looked through him like he wasn't there, the way his skills had atrophied into something unrecognizable. "I try, baby. That's all any of us can do." Maisie nodded solemnly and returned to her snow cone. Ezra straightened and let his gaze drift across the base, taking in the familiar geometry of military installations. The ordered rows of buildings, the precise angles of the parade grounds, the flags snapping in the Pacific breeze. He had spent 14 years in places like this, had bled for the right to call himself part of something larger than himself. And now he stood on the outside looking in, a stranger in a world that had once been home. The memory surfaced without warning. January 2018. A convoy of 8 vehicles moving through hostile territory in eastern Afghanistan. Ezra was attached as Overwatch, positioned on a ridge 1,800 meters from the road. His spotter that day was a young operator named Chun, fresh from Green Team and eager to prove himself. The ambush came at the narrowest point of the valley. RPGs from the ridge, small arms from the village. The lead vehicle took a direct hit and burst into flames. The convoy was trapped, 43 personnel pinned down with no air support and no extraction route. "Spectre, we are taking heavy fire," the convoy commander's voice crackled over the radio, requesting immediate support. Ezra didn't respond. He was already working. His scope found the first shooter at 1,600 meters. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. The shooter dropped. He found the second at 1,700 meters. The rifle kicked again. Another body fell. 11 rounds. 14 shooters. He made 11 shots. 11 kills. And then his rifle ran dry. The convoy commander called Broken Arrow. The code for imminent overrun. The code that meant everyone was about to die. Ezra didn't think. He moved. Down the ridge, across 400 meters of open ground, toward the sound of gunfire. He had his sidearm. 16 rounds. And the knife strapped to his thigh. 3 hostiles had advanced on the wounded. They never saw him coming. The first died with Ezra's blade in his throat. The second turned just in time to catch 2 rounds in the chest. The third managed to raise his weapon before Ezra closed the distance and broke his neck with a technique he had learned in a basement in Virginia a lifetime ago. 43 Americans went home that day. Ezra received a medal, a Navy Cross, pinned to his chest by a vice admiral who called him a national treasure. He stood at attention and said, "Thank you, sir," and went back to his quarters and vomited until there was nothing left. 3 months later, Damon died. The IED caught their vehicle on a routine patrol. Routine, the word that got men killed. Ezra was in the passenger seat. Damon was in the back. The blast flipped the vehicle and sent shrapnel tearing through the cabin like angry wasps. Ezra crawled out through the shattered windshield. His ears were ringing. His left arm wasn't working right. He found Damon in the wreckage, pinned beneath twisted metal, his legs gone below the knee. "Spec." Damon's voice was calm. Too calm. The voice of a man who knew. "You gotta go, brother. They're coming. I'm not leaving you." Ezra dragged him clear of the wreckage, applied tourniquets with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, called for medevac on a radio that might or might not have been working, and held his best friend while the blood pumped out faster than any tourniquet could stop. "Tell my mom I tried," Damon whispered. "Tell her I tried to be good. You are good. You're the best of us." Damon's hand found Ezra's and squeezed. "Not your fault, Spec." He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "Never your fault. Promise me." "I promise." The light went out of Damon's eyes 90 seconds later. Ezra held him for another 10 minutes, until the medevac arrived and pried the body from his arms. "Daddy?" Maisie's voice pulled him back. She was looking up at him with Elena's eyes, her snow cone forgotten, her expression worried. "You're crying," she said. Ezra touched his face. His fingers came away wet. He hadn't realized, hadn't felt the tears at all. "Sorry, sweetheart." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. Daddy was just thinking about someone he lost. Was it Damon? Ezra froze. "How do you know that name?" Maisie looked down at her snow cone. "I hear you sometimes. At night. You talk to him when you think I'm sleeping." The words hit him like a bullet. All those nights he thought she was asleep. All those whispered conversations with a dead man in the dark. She had heard everything. He knelt down and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." "It's okay, Daddy." She wrapped her small arms around his neck. "I know you miss him. I miss Mommy too." They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter, holding each other against the weight of everything they had lost. The festivities continued around them. Families laughed. Children played. And no one noticed the man in the tire shop shirt crying into his daughter's hair. Ezra's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it first, then pulled it out when it buzzed again. 2 messages. The first from his old team leader. "Seriously, brother, come find us. We're at the demo area." The second from an unknown number. "Spectre, we need to talk." Vega. Ezra stared at the message from Vega for a long moment. The name triggered memories he had spent 3 years trying to bury. Vega had been a senior chief when Ezra was coming up through the teams. A hard man with harder standards who had pushed Ezra past every limit he thought he had. They hadn't been close, but they had been brothers in the way that all teen guys were brothers. He deleted both messages without responding. "Come on, sweetheart." He lifted Maisie back onto his shoulders. "Let's go find some more bounce houses." But they didn't make it to the bounce houses. General Hurst had been busy. Word had spread through his staff that the civilian from the gate was still on base, still walking around like he belonged, still wearing that ridiculous tire shop shirt like a badge of honor. The general's aide had done some digging. No active duty record, expired dependent ID, no verifiable military service. It was, in the aide's professional opinion, a clear case of stolen valor. Hurst found them near the food vendors. He approached with his entourage in tow, the photographer already snapping pictures. 2 base security guards flanked him, their expressions professionally neutral. "Sir," Hurst called out, his voice pitched to Carrie, "I'm going to need you to come with me." Ezra stopped. His hands tightened slightly on Maisie's legs, the only sign of tension in his otherwise relaxed posture. "Is there a problem, General?" "That's what we're going to find out." Hurst's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We've been looking into your claims of military service." "I haven't made any claims." "Your daughter has." Hurst nodded toward Maisie. "She says you can shoot. She says you were in the military." Now either a 6-year-old is lying or her father is. Families were gathering again. The circus was back, and Ezra was once more the main attraction. He could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment in their eyes. The tire shop guy who thought he could play soldier. "General," Ezra said quietly, "I'm asking you to please lower your voice. You're scaring my daughter, and I'm asking you to explain yourself." Hurst stepped closer, close enough that Ezra could smell the coffee on his breath. "This is a military installation. False claims of service are a federal offense. I've got NCIS on speed dial." Maisie's arms tightened around Ezra's head. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I want to go home." "We will, sweetheart. Soon." "No," Hurst said. "Not soon. Not until we get some answers." He turned to the security guards. "Take him to the security office. We'll sort this out there." The guards moved forward. Ezra shifted his weight, a subtle adjustment that positioned Maisie away from the approaching men. His body angled to protect her, an instinct so deeply ingrained he didn't even realize he was doing it. "Sir," one of the guards said, his voice uncertain, "if you could just come with us." Ezra didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Hurst, his breathing slow and controlled. The guard's hand reached toward his arm. "I wouldn't do that." The voice came from behind the crowd. Clear, commanding, female. The gathered families parted to reveal a woman in khaki medical scrubs with a Navy corpsman insignia on her collar. Chief Petty Officer Adriana Moss walked through the crowd like she owned it, her eyes fixed on the confrontation. "Chief," Hurst said, irritation flickering across his face, "this doesn't concern you." "With respect, sir, it does." Adriana positioned herself beside Ezra, not quite between him and the guards, but close enough to make a statement. "There's a child involved. I'm a medical professional. That makes it my concern." She looked at Maisie, her expression softening. "Hey there, sweetheart. That's a beautiful crown. Did your daddy make that for you?" Maisie nodded, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "He must love you very much." Adriana turned back to Hurst, her voice hardening. "General, whatever is happening here, it can wait until this child is somewhere safe. She's clearly distressed." Hurst's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by an enlisted sailor with more courage than sense. "Chief, I'm conducting an investigation into potential stolen valor. I suggest you step aside. And I'm suggesting, sir, that humiliating a man in front of his daughter isn't an investigation. It's a spectacle." The crowd had grown larger. Phones were out now, recording everything. The aide whispered urgently in Hurst's ear, something about optics, something about social media. The general's face flushed. "Fine." He stepped back, smoothing his uniform. "We'll do this properly." He pointed at Ezra. "You stay right here. I'm going to verify your identity, and if I find out you've been lying about your service, I'll have you arrested in front of your daughter and everyone else." He turned and stalked toward the command building, his entourage scrambling to keep up. The security guards hesitated, then followed, leaving Ezra and Adriana alone in a circle of watching families. "You okay?" Adriana asked quietly. Ezra looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of recognition or gratitude or both. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." She glanced toward the command building. "That man is on a mission. If you got anything that proves your service, now would be a good time to find it." "I don't need to prove anything." Adriana studied his face, the way he held himself, the scars on his hands that she could see now that she was close, the tattoo peeking out from under his watch. "Those coordinates on your arm," she said slowly. "I've seen ink like that before. On operators. On guys who've been places they can't talk about." Ezra tugged his sleeve down. "It doesn't matter. It matters to your daughter." Adriana looked at Maisie, who was watching them with wide, frightened eyes. "She deserves to know who her father really is, not the story that General is about to tell." Ezra was silent for a long moment. Then he lifted Maisie down from his shoulders and knelt beside her, holding both her hands in his. "Maisie, baby, some things are going to happen now. Some people are going to say things about Daddy. I need you to remember one thing, okay? No matter what anyone says, I love you. And everything I've ever done, I did to protect people like you." Maisie nodded, her lower lip trembling. "Are you in trouble, Daddy?" Ezra looked up at Adriana, then back at his daughter. "No, sweetheart. Daddy's not in trouble." He pulled her into a hug, his eyes closing. "But some people are about to learn that they made a very big mistake." The minutes stretched like hours. Ezra stood near the food vendors with Maisie's hand in his, watching the command building where Hurst had disappeared. Adriana had stayed, positioning herself nearby like a silent sentinel. The crowd had thinned slightly, but the phones remained out, recording, waiting. Maisie tugged at his hand. "Daddy, I'm tired." "I know, baby. Just a little longer." She leaned against his leg, her cardboard crown askew. The blue stain from her snow cone had spread across her chin like war paint. She looked small and fragile and utterly out of place in the drama unfolding around her. Ezra crouched down and straightened her crown. "You know what this reminds me of?" "What?" "The time Mommy made us wear matching costumes for Halloween. You were a princess then, too. Remember?" Maisie's face brightened slightly. "I was Princess Elsa, and you were the snowman. Olaf." Ezra smiled despite everything. The memory felt like a lifetime ago. Elena had spent weeks on those costumes, sewing sequins and glitter until their apartment looked like a craft store had exploded. Maisie had been 3, toddling door to door in her blue dress, while Ezra shuffled behind in an inflatable snowman suit that made it impossible to fit through doorways. "Mommy laughed so hard," Maisie said, "when you got stuck in Mrs. Patterson's screen door." "She did." Ezra's throat tightened. "She had the best laugh." "Imisialef." "Me too, sweetheart." Every day, a commotion near the demonstration area drew his attention. Master Chief Vega was pushing through the crowd, phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of controlled urgency. He was heading toward the command building, but his eyes swept the crowd until they found Ezra. Their gazes locked for a moment. Vega's expression shifted, cycling through recognition, confusion, and something that looked almost like shock. He changed direction, moving toward Ezra with purpose. Adriana noticed too. She stepped closer, her posture protective. "Friend of yours?" "We served together. A long time ago." Vega stopped 3 feet away. His eyes moved over Ezra's face, cataloging the changes, the years, the wear. Then they dropped to the arm where the tattoo had been glimpsed. "Roll up your sleeve," Vega said. His voice was quiet, but carried an edge of command that brooked no argument. Ezra didn't move. "Master Chief, I don't think that's necessary." "Roll up your sleeve." Vega's jaw was tight. "I just spent 15 minutes on the phone with the personnel office pulling records. I know what I'm looking at. I just need to confirm it." The crowd around them had fallen silent. Families watched with bated breath, sensing that something significant was happening. Adriana's hand had moved to her radio, ready to call for backup if needed. Ezra looked at Maisie. She looked back at him with Elena's eyes, trusting, waiting. He released her hand and slowly pushed up his sleeve. The tattoo was revealed inch by inch. First the coordinates, 36.2048 north, 65.2187 east. Then the date, March 7th, 2016. Then the initials DR enclosed in a small trident. And below that, fresher ink that still looked raw, EW, with different coordinates and the words "Forever my anchor." Vega's breath caught. His face went pale. "Spectre," he whispered. The word came out broken, almost reverent. "My God, we thought you were dead." "Not dead." Ezra pulled his sleeve back down. "Just gone." Vega shook his head slowly, disbelief written across his weathered features. 3 years. 3 years we thought you died on that last deployment. The records were sealed after you separated. Nobody knew what happened to you. That was the point. You have a Navy Cross. Vega's voice cracked. You saved 43 men with a knife. You were the best shooter in team history. And you're standing here in a tire shop shirt, letting some two-star treat you like garbage. Ezra glanced at Maisie, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "I have my reasons." Adriana stepped forward, her medical training warring with her curiosity. "Someone want to explain what's happening?" Vega turned to her, and there were tears in his eyes. Actual tears, streaming down the face of a man who had probably never cried in his life. "Chief, this man." He pointed at Ezra with a trembling finger. "This man is Petty Officer First Class Ezra Whitfield. Call sign Spectre. 14 years, SEAL Team 3. Si combat de promo. Bronze Star with V-Device. Navy Cross." The words hung in the air like thunder. Adriana's hand flew to her mouth. Around them, the watching families began to murmur. The name meant nothing to most of them, but the medals did. Everyone knew what a Navy Cross meant. The photographer who had been documenting Hearst's circus lowered his camera. His face had gone the color of old milk. "Oh no," he muttered. "Oh no, no, no." Because he understood what was about to happen. He understood that every photo he had taken of General Hearst mocking this man was now evidence of career suicide. He understood that the smiling general was about to walk out of that command building and discover that he had spent the afternoon publicly humiliating one of the most decorated operators in naval special warfare history. Vega pulled out his phone. "I have to make some calls. People need to know." Ezra caught his arm. "Master Chief." "Wait." Vega froze, looking down at the hand on his arm, then up at Ezra's face. "I didn't come here for recognition. I came here because my daughter wanted to see the bounce houses." Ezra's voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath. "I don't want a scene. I don't want revenge. I just want to take my daughter home." Vega stared at him for a long moment. Then he gently removed Ezra's hand from his arm. "With respect, Spectre, it's too late for that." He nodded toward the command building, where General Hearst had just emerged with his entourage. "That man is about to try to arrest you for stolen valor in front of 100 witnesses. And I will not let that happen." Hearst was striding across the grounds, security guards in tow, his face flushed with self-righteous certainty. He hadn't seen Vega yet, hadn't noticed the shift in the crowd's energy. He was too focused on his target, too certain of his victory. Vega straightened to his full height and stepped forward to intercept him. "General Hearst," he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent grounds. "We need to talk. Now." General Hearst stopped mid-stride, irritation flashing across his face. "Master Chief, I'm in the middle of something. Whatever it is can wait." "No, sir." Vega's voice was iron. "It cannot." The two men faced each other across 10 feet of California concrete. Behind Hearst, his aide and the security guards shifted nervously. Behind Vega, the crowd had grown larger, phones raised, recording every second. The air felt charged, electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. Hearst's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being challenged by enlisted men, even senior ones. "Master Chief, I'm going to give you exactly 5 seconds to step aside before I have you written up for insubordination." "Sir, with respect, you need to hear what I have to say. What you have to say can wait until after I deal with this stolen valor case." Hearst pointed past Vega toward Ezra. "That man has been impersonating a service member. I have confirmation from personnel that there's no active record." Vega didn't move. "That's because his records were sealed when he separated, sir. Classified operations." the kind that don't show up in standard databases. Something flickered in Hearst's eyes. Uncertain maybe, but it was quickly buried under layers of pride and stubbornness. He had committed to this course of action in front of too many witnesses. Backing down now would be admitting he was wrong. Sealed records. Hearst laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's convenient. Every faker claims classified operations. He stepped around Vega, heading toward Ezra. Let's see what our mystery man has to say for himself. Ezra watched him approach. He had lifted Maisie back onto his shoulders, positioning her away from the confrontation. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes tracked Hearst's movement with the precision of a targeting system. Vega followed, positioning himself to Ezra's left. Adriana moved to his right. They flanked him like an honor guard, though Ezra hadn't asked for protection. All right. Hearst stopped in front of Ezra, hands on his hips. Last chance. Tell me who you really are, or I'm calling NCIS and having you processed for fraud. Ezra was silent for a long moment. He looked at Maisie, who had buried her face in his hair to hide from the angry man. He looked at Vega, whose jaw was tight with barely contained fury. He looked at Adriana, whose eyes held something that might have been hope. Then he looked at Hearst. My daughter asked me a question earlier, Ezra said quietly. She asked if I still help people. I didn't know how to answer her. I don't care about your daughter's questions. I care about the truth. The truth. Ezra nodded slowly. The truth is complicated, General. The truth is that I spent 14 years doing things I can't talk about in places that don't exist on any map. The truth is that I held my best friend while he bled out in my arms because I missed a threat by half a second. The truth is that my wife died while I was on the other side of the world, and I couldn't even hold her hand. His voice remained steady, but something had changed. The tired father in the tire shop shirt was gone. In his place stood something else. Something harder. Something forged in places where men like Hearst would never survive. The truth is that I walked away from everything I knew because my daughter needed a father more than the Navy needed another shooter. And the truth is that I came here today because she asked me to, because she wanted to see the bounce houses, because after everything I've put her through, I owed her one good day. He stepped closer to Hearst, close enough that the general had to resist the urge to step back. So you can call NCIS. You can process me for fraud. You can do whatever you need to do to feel important. But when you're done, when all the paperwork is filed and all the phone calls are made, you're going to discover that you spent your afternoon humiliating a man who earned his place in this community long before you learned which fork to use at a Pentagon dinner. The crowd was absolutely silent. Even the children had stopped playing, sensing the gravity of what was happening. Hearst's face had gone red. His hands trembled at his sides. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever dared. You're making a serious mistake, he said, his voice tight. I don't know who you think you are, but I'm a 2-star general. I've commanded thousands of men. I've overseen operations across 3 continents. Ezra tilted his head slightly. Have you ever killed a man with a knife, General? The question hung in the air like a grenade. Have you ever crossed 400 meters of open ground under fire because your rifle was empty and your brothers are dying? Have you ever held someone's hand while the light left their eyes and promised them you'd tell their mother they tried? Hearst opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I have. Ezra's voice dropped to barely a whisper, but in the silence, everyone heard. 11 times with a rifle in a single engagement. 3 times with a blade. Once with my bare hands when there was nothing else left. He reached up and lifted Maisie from his shoulders, setting her gently on the ground. She clung to his leg, watching the general with wide eyes. My name is Ezra Whitfield. My call sign was Spectre. I served 14 years with SEAL Team 3. Si Combat de Promo. I have a Bronze Star with V device for valor. I have 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat. And I have a Navy Cross for an action in January 2018 where I saved 43 American lives. He paused, letting the words sink in. But none of that matters to me anymore. What matters is this little girl. What matters is being her father. What matters is trying to give her one good day in a world that hasn't given us many. He looked down at Maisie, and his voice softened. So I'm going to ask you one more time, General. Please, lower your voice around my daughter. She's already lost her mother. She doesn't need to watch her father be arrested for crimes he didn't commit. The silence stretched. Hearst stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Behind him, his aide was frantically typing on his phone. The photographer had stopped shooting entirely, his camera hanging forgotten at his side. Vega stepped forward, holding up his phone. "Sir, I have confirmation from SOCOM. Full service record. Everything he said is true." Hearst didn't respond. He was staring at Ezra like he was seeing him for the first time. Like the tire shop sure had dissolved, and something else had emerged from underneath. Something that made a two-star general look very, very small. The silence that followed Vega's confirmation was absolute. Not even the Pacific breeze dared to move. 100 people stood frozen, phones raised, watching history unfold on a sunny California afternoon. Hearst's mouth opened and closed twice before sound emerged. "That's not possible." His voice had lost its commanding edge. "Personnel said there was no record." "Sealed records, sir." Vega's tone was clipped, professional, devastating. "Classified operations require classified paperwork. You would know that if you'd ever been read into anything above your pay grade." The insult landed like a slap. Hearst's face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. His aide stepped forward, whispering urgently, but the general waved him off. "I want to see proof," Hearst said. "Real proof. Not phone calls and claims." Ezra reached for the collar of his shirt. For a moment, everyone thought he was going to remove it, to show the scars that mapped his torso like a road atlas of violence. Instead, he pulled out a chain that had been hidden beneath the fabric. 2 sets of dog tags dangled from the chain. One set was worn smooth, the edges rounded by years of constant wear. The other set was darker, stained with something that might have been rust, but wasn't. Ezra lifted them over his head and held them out. "These are mine." He indicated the worn set. "Ezra James Whitfield. Oh, positive. Catholic. And these belong to Petty Officer Second Class Damon Reeves. He died in my arms on April 23rd, 2018. I've carried them every day since." Hearst stared at the tags but didn't move to take them. Vega reached out and gently took the darker set. He turned them over in his hands, reading the information stamped into the metal. His jaw tightened. "I knew Reeves," he said quietly. "Good kid. Hell of a spotter." He looked up at Ezra. "I didn't know you were with him when he died. I was the only one with him." Ezra's voice was steady, but his eyes had gone somewhere far away. "IED caught our vehicle. Everyone else was thrown clear. Damon was pinned. I stayed with him until medevac arrived. Took them 10 minutes. He was gone in 90 seconds. The crowd had gone completely still. Several people were crying openly. A woman near the front had pressed her hand to her heart, tears streaming down her face. Even the security guards who had come to arrest Ezra stood with their heads bowed. Hearst swallowed hard. His certainty had crumbled, leaving something raw and exposed in its place. He looked at the dog tags, at the man who carried them, at the little girl clinging to her father's leg. "I didn't know," he said. The words came out small, almost childlike. "No." Ezra took the tags back from Vega and hung them around his neck. "You didn't. You saw a man in a cheap shirt, and you made assumptions. You saw someone who didn't look the way you expected, and you decided he couldn't possibly be what he claimed." He stepped closer to Hearst, close enough to speak without being overheard by the crowd. "I don't blame you for that, General. I know what I look like. I know how this appears. But I need you to understand something. Every veteran you see on these streets, every man or woman who looks broken or lost or forgotten, they might have carried a weight you will never understand. They might have done things that would give you nightmares. They might have held dying friends and made promises they couldn't keep." His voice dropped lower. "So before you judge, before you mock, before you decide that someone doesn't belong, remember that service doesn't always look the way you expect, and sacrifice doesn't always wear a uniform." Hearst's eyes had filled with tears. His hands, which had been so steady when he was delivering insults, now trembled at his sides. The transformation was remarkable. The pompous general had vanished, replaced by something smaller, something human. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Ezra studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I made mistakes too, General. We all have. The question is what we do after. He turned back to Maisie and knelt down beside her. His voice softened, became the voice of a father again rather than a warrior. Hey, princess. You okay? Maisie's lower lip trembled. Is the mean man going to say sorry? Ezra glanced over his shoulder at Hurst, who stood frozen, tears now openly streaming down his face. I think he already did, sweetheart. I think he's very sorry. Maisie considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old philosopher. Then she let go of Ezra's leg and walked toward the general. Every adult in the vicinity held their breath. She stopped in front of Hurst and looked up at him with Elena's eyes. It's okay, she said. Her voice was small but clear. Daddy says everyone makes mistakes. He says it's what you do after that matters. Hurst stared down at her, this tiny girl in her cardboard crown and snow cone stains, offering absolution he didn't deserve. His knees buckled. He didn't fall completely. His aide caught his arm, but he sank enough that he was eye level with Maisie, enough that everyone saw the moment when a 2-star general was brought low by a 6-year-old's forgiveness. Thank you, he said, his voice cracking. His hand reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the aluminum foil crown. Thank you, princess. Maisie smiled. She reached out and patted his cheek the way she patted Ezra's when he was sad. It's okay, she repeated. Daddy will forgive you too. He forgives everyone, even the people who hurt him. She turned and walked back to Ezra, taking his hand like nothing remarkable had happened. Like she hadn't just delivered a sermon that would replay in the minds of everyone present for the rest of their lives. Ezra lifted her back onto his shoulders. His eyes met Hurst's one final time. We're going to go find those bounce houses now, General. I think we've both had enough for one day. He turned and began walking toward the bounce house area, Maisie's cardboard crown catching the California sun. Behind him, General Franklin Hurst remained on his knees in the middle of the Family Day celebration, weeping openly while 100 phones recorded his surrender. They didn't make it to the bounce houses. Ezra had barely taken 20 steps before a voice rang out across the grounds, freezing him in place. Spectre. The word carried like a gunshot. Ezra turned slowly, his hand instinctively moving to shield Maisie's legs. A man was pushing through the crowd. Older, gray at the temples, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide the military bearing underneath. His eyes were locked on Ezra with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Captain Thomas Blackwood, retired. Ezra's first-team leader from 15 years ago. The man who had given him his call sign. My God. Blackwood stopped 3 feet away, his chest heaving. Spectre, it's really you. Captain. Ezra's voice was neutral, guarded. It's been a while. A while. Blackwood let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Ezra, we thought you were dead. After you separated, the records went dark. Nobody could find you. Some of the guys thought you'd eaten your gun. Others thought you'd disappeared overseas. I've spent 3 years wondering which one it was. The words hit Ezra like physical blows. He hadn't considered what his disappearance might have meant to the men he'd served with. Hadn't thought about the questions, the searches, the grief. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I needed to disappear. I couldn't be that person anymore. Blackwood shook his head. You don't get to apologize. Not to me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you have any idea what you meant to us? What you still mean? His voice cracked. You saved my life twice. You trained half the snipers in the teams. You were the best any of us had ever seen. That was a long time ago. It was yesterday. Blackwood grabbed Ezra's arm, his grip fierce. Spectre, I studied that convoy action at Warcombe for 6 months. It's in the training manual now. The shot sequence, the approach, the close quarters. What you did that day is being taught to every new operator who comes through the pipeline. Ezra was silent. He hadn't known, hadn't wanted to know. The crowd around them had grown again. Word was spreading through the Family Day celebration like wildfire. The man in the tire shop shirt, the general on his knees, the legend who had returned from the dead. Active duty operators began appearing at the edges of the gathering. Men Ezra had trained, men who had heard the stories, men who had studied his techniques without ever knowing if he was alive or dead. They stood in a loose semicircle, watching with expressions that ranged from disbelief to reverence. Vega stepped up beside Blackwood. "Sir, I've been making calls. The community knows." He glanced at Ezra. "They're coming." "Who's coming?" "Everyone." As if on cue, a black SUV pulled up at the edge of the event area. The doors opened, and 3 men emerged, all in civilian clothes, all moving with the distinctive economy of motion that marked special operators. Behind them, another vehicle arrived. Then another. Ezra recognized faces. Men for his old platoon. Men from other teams who had crossed paths during joint operations. Men who had heard his voice over the radio calling targets, guiding them home, keeping them alive. One of them, a massive operator with a beard that reached his chest, pushed to the front of the growing crowd. Kowalski, who had been a new guy when Ezra left. "Spectre." Kowalski's voice was thick. "You son of a bitch. We had a memorial for you. I heard. I gave a speech." Kowalski was crying openly now, tears disappearing into his beard. "I told everyone about the time you shot a target at 2,200 meters in a sandstorm. I told them about the time you carried me 3 clicks with a broken leg. I told them you were the best of us." He surged forward and wrapped Ezra in a bear hug that lifted him off the ground. Maisie squealed on Ezra's shoulders, suddenly airborne. "Easy, Kowalski." Ezra's voice was muffled against the big man's shoulder. "I've got precious cargo up top." Kowalski set him down and stepped back, wiping his eyes with hands the size of dinner plates. Sorry. He looked up at Maisie and his face transformed. "And who is this princess?" "I'm Maisie." She adjusted her crown with dignity. "My daddy made me this crown." "Your daddy?" Kowalski said slowly, looking at Ezra with new understanding. "He got married. He had a kid. He started at Ezra with something like wonder. You finally got a life." "I had a life." Ezra's voice softened. "Elena passed 3 years ago. Galaxidon. It's just me and Maisie now." The joy on Kowalski's face crumbled. "Ah, Spec. Ah, brother. I'm so sorry." More men were arriving. More embraces. More tears. More disbelief. The family day celebration had ground to a complete halt, every eye fixed on the reunion unfolding in the middle of the grounds. Maisie watched it all from her perch on Ezra's shoulders. She didn't understand who all these crying men were or why they kept hugging her daddy. But she understood that they loved him. She understood that he had been missed. "Daddy," she whispered, "are these your friends?" Ezra looked around at the faces surrounding him. Many had bled with. Many had saved. Men who had saved him. Brothers in every sense that mattered. "Yeah, sweetheart." He had to stop and swallow the lump in his throat. "These are my friends." A commotion at the edge of the crowd drew everyone's attention. The sea of operators parted, and a woman in dress whites strode through. Her uniform was immaculate. Her shoulders bore the stars of a rear admiral. Her face was carved from stone. But her eyes were red. Admiral Catherine Reeves stopped in front of Ezra. The crowd went silent. Petty Officer Whitfield. Her voice was formal, controlled. "Admiral." Ezra straightened instinctively, his posture shifting to attention even with Maisie on his shoulders. She studied his face for a long moment. Then her control cracked. "You were with my son when he died." It wasn't a question. Ezra nodded anyway. "Yes, ma'am. I was with Damon until the end." The Admiral's jaw tightened. Her eyes glistened. "Then we have a great deal to talk about." The crowd parted as Admiral Reeves stepped closer. She moved with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime in uniform, but there was something fragile underneath the bearing, something that threatened to shatter. Ezra lowered Maisie from his shoulders and handed her to Adriana, who had materialized beside him. The corpsman took the girl without a word, understanding that what was about to happen required both hands free. "Ma'am," Ezra began. Admiral Reeves held up her hand. "Not here." She turned and walked toward a quieter area near the perimeter fence, away from the phones and the crowds and the watching eyes. Ezra followed. The operators fell back, creating a corridor of respect. Even General Hurst, who had finally risen from his knees, stepped aside. They stopped near a memorial wall dedicated to fallen service members. Bronze plaques gleamed in the afternoon sun. Names of men and women who had given everything. Damon's name was there, third row from the top. Admiral Reeves stared at the plaque for a long moment before speaking. "I received the official report," she said. Her voice was steady but barely. "IED. Catastrophic injuries. Death occurred prior to medical evacuation." She turned to face Ezra. "But reports don't tell you everything, do they? They don't tell you what he said. They don't tell you if he was afraid. They don't tell you if he died alone." Ezra met her eyes. He didn't look away. "He wasn't alone, ma'am. I was with him from the moment of the blast until the moment he passed. I held his hand. I talked to him. He knew I was there." The Admiral's composure cracked. Her lower lip trembled. "What did he say?" The question hung in the air. Around them, the sounds of the family day celebration had faded to nothing. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Ezra closed his eyes. He had relived this moment 1,000 times in the dark, had whispered the words to Damon's ghost in the small hours of the morning, had carried them like stones in his chest for 4 years. "The blast threw me clear," he said slowly. "When I got to the vehicle, Damon was pinned. His legs were gone below the knee. He was conscious, alert. He knew what was happening. He opened his eyes. I applied tourniquets, but the damage was too severe. The femoral arteries were compromised on both sides. I knew he had minutes, maybe less." Admiral Reeves was crying now, silent tears tracking down her weathered face. She didn't wipe them away. "He asked me to tell you something," Ezra continued. "He said, tell my mom I tried. Tell her I tried to be good." A sound escaped the Admiral. Small, broken, the sound of a mother's heart shattering. "I told him he was good." Ezra's voice cracked for the first time. "I told him he was the best of us. I told him I was honored to serve beside him." She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to contain the grief that was spilling out. "His last words were for me," Ezra said. "He grabbed my hand, and he looked me right in the eyes, and he said, 'Not your fault, Spec. Never your fault. Promise me.' He took a shaky breath. I promised him. I promised him it wasn't my fault. But I spent 4 years knowing that I lied. Because I was his sniper. I was supposed to see the threats before they reached us. And I missed the IED. I missed it by 10 meters. Admiral Reeves stepped forward. Her hand reached out and touched Ezra's face, cupping his cheek like a mother would. "You didn't miss anything," she said. Her voice was fierce through the tears. "IEDs aren't sniper targets. You couldn't have seen it. You couldn't have stopped it. And you stayed with my son when you could have run. I would never have left him. I know." She pulled him into an embrace. The Admiral, in her dress whites, hugging the man in the tire shop shirt. "I know you wouldn't." They stood like that for a long moment. Two people bound by grief, by loss, by a promise made in blood. When she finally pulled back, Admiral Reeves reached into her uniform jacket. Her hand emerged holding something that glinted in the sunlight. Dog tags, darker than Ezra's, stained with the same rust-colored residue. "These are Damon's originals," she said. "The ones they recovered from the site. I've been carrying them for 4 years. Waiting, Mom, waiting for someone who deserved them." She pressed the tags into Ezra's palm. "My son wrote me letters from every deployment. He wrote about his sniper, the one they called Spectre, the one who watched over him, the one who never missed." Ezra stared at the tags in his hand. "He said that if anything ever happened to him, you would blame yourself. He said you would carry that guilt like a weapon. He said it would destroy you if you let it." The Admiral's hands closed around his, the dog tags between them. "He also said that you were the finest man he ever served with, that he would follow you anywhere, that he trusted you with his life." She leaned closer, her eyes burning into his. "My son trusted you to live, Ezra, not to die slowly of guilt, not to disappear into a bottle or a grave. To live, to find something worth fighting for, to honor his memory by building something beautiful." She glanced toward the crowd, toward the small figure in the cardboard crown being held by Adriana. "Have you done that?" she asked quietly. "Have you found something worth fighting for?" Ezra followed her gaze to Maisie. His daughter was watching him with Elena's eyes, her crown askew, her face worried. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. "I have." "Then stop punishing yourself for a death you couldn't prevent." Admiral Reeves released his hands. "And start living the life my son would have wanted for you." She stepped back and straightened her uniform, composing herself with visible effort. "Now," she turned toward the crowd, toward the waiting operators and the watching families and the general who had started all of this. I believe there's an apology that needs to be witnessed, and a hero who needs to come home. Admiral Reeves walked back toward the crowd with Ezra at her side. The gathered families and operators parted before her like water before a ship's bow. She moved with purpose, her eyes fixed on General Hurst, who stood at the edge of the gathering looking like a man awaiting execution. "General," her voice carried across the silent grounds. "A word, please." Hurst stepped forward. His earlier arrogance had been stripped away completely, leaving something raw and exposed. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what he had done. "Admiral Reeves," he began, "I want to explain." "There is nothing to explain." Her voice was ice. "I watched the videos on the drive over here. I saw everything." "Ma'am, I didn't know. You didn't ask." She stepped closer, close enough that only Hurst could hear her next words. "You saw a man in a tire shop shirt, and you decided he was nothing. You mocked him in front of his daughter. You threatened him with arrest. You turned his attempt to give his child a good day into a public humiliation." Hurst's head dropped. "That man," Admiral Reeves continued, "saved 43 American lives with 11 rounds and a knife. That man held my son while he died. That man walked away from a legendary career to raise his daughter alone after losing his wife." Her voice rose, no longer private. "And you treated him like garbage because he didn't look the way you expected." The crowd was absolutely silent. Phones were raised, recording every word. This moment would live forever on the internet, a permanent testament to the cost of assumption. Hurst raised his head. His eyes were red, his face wet. "What can I do?" His voice cracked. "How do I make this right?" Admiral Reeves glanced at Ezra, who stood quietly beside her with Damon's dog tags now hanging next to his own. "That's not my question to answer," she said. All eyes turned to Ezra, the man in the tire shop shirt, the legend in disguise, the father who had only wanted to give his daughter one good day. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Maisie, still held in Adriana's arms, watching everything with wide eyes. "Can you put her down?" Ezra asked softly. Adriana set Maisie on the ground. The little girl immediately ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his leg. Her cardboard crown had tilted again, and Ezra reached down to straighten it. "General Hurst," he said, "come here, please." Hurst approached slowly, like a man walking toward judgment. He stopped in front of Ezra and stood at attention, waiting. Ezra knelt down, so he was at Maisie's level. He took her hand in his. "Maisie, this is General Hurst. He said some things earlier that hurt Daddy's feelings. Do you remember?" She nodded, her face serious. "The general wants to apologize, but I want you to decide if we should let him. What do you think?" Maisie studied Hurst with the unblinking intensity of childhood. The general stood frozen under her gaze, more unnerved by this 6-year-old jury than he had ever been in any combat briefing. Finally, Maisie spoke. "Does he mean it?" Ezra looked up at Hurst. "Do you mean it, General?" Hurst's knees buckled again. He dropped to the ground, bringing himself to Maisie's level, eye to eye with the child whose father he had tried to destroy. "I mean it," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I was wrong. I was cruel. I judged your father without knowing anything about him. And I am more sorry than I know how to say." Maisie considered this. Then she reached out and patted his cheek again, the same gesture she had used before. "Okay," she said simply. "I forgive you." Hurst let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He looked at Ezra, desperate hope in his eyes. Ezra straightened and extended his hand. The general stared at it for a moment, then grasped it like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "Learn from this," Ezra said quietly. "The next person you dismiss might not be as forgiving." Hurst nodded frantically. "I will. I swear I will." Admiral Reeves stepped forward. "There will be consequences, General. Your conduct today was unbecoming of an officer. I'll be filing a formal report." Hurst accepted this with a nod. He seemed almost relieved, as if the promise of official punishment was easier to bear than the weight of what he had done. "But those consequences," Admiral Reeves continued, "are between you and the Navy. What happens here in this moment is between you and the man you wronged." She turned to the crowd, raising her voice so everyone could hear. Let the record show that Petty Officer First Class Ezra Whitfield, callsign Spectre, has shown more grace today than any of us deserve to witness. Let the record show that he came to this family day seeking nothing but a good day for his daughter. And let the record show that when given every right to demand retribution, he chose forgiveness instead. The operators in the crowd snapped to attention. One by one, hands rose to foreheads in salute. The wave spread through the gathering until every active duty member present was saluting the man in the tire shop shirt. "We're not saluting your rank," Vegas said, his voice thick. "We're saluting what you did, what you sacrificed, what you still are." Ezra looked at the sea of salutes, at the faces of men he had served with and trained and bled beside. His throat tightened. Maisie tugged at his hand. "Daddy, why are they doing that?" He looked down at her, at Elena's eyes and their daughter's face, at the cardboard crown he had made during a night shift to give her something to smile about. "They're saying thank you, sweetheart." "For what?" Ezra was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted her up and settled her on his hip, holding her close. "For trying," he said. "Just for trying." Adriana approached with tears streaming down her face. "I run a support group," she said, "for military families who've lost someone. Spouses, parents, kids." She looked at Maisie. "There's a session next week. No pressure, but your daughter might like meeting other kids who understand." Maisie looked at Ezra with hopeful eyes. "Can we, Daddy?" And for the first time in 3 years, Ezra Whitfield didn't say no. "Yeah, baby." He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her small body against his chest. "Yeah, I think we can." 6 months later, Ezra stood at a podium in the SEAL Team 3 compound. The room was filled with veterans in various stages of transition, some in civilian clothes that still didn't fit right, others in the worn uniforms of men who hadn't quite let go. Their families sat beside them, wives and husbands and children who had learned to live with absence and were now learning to live with presence. "My name is Ezra Whitfield," he said. His voice was steady, practiced now after months of saying these words. Call sign was Spectre, and I almost disappeared. The room was silent, attentive, hungry for something they couldn't name. I spent 14 years in the teams, 6 deployments. I lost my best friend to an IED and my wife to a drunk driver. And when the grief got too heavy, I did what a lot of us do. I ran. He paused, letting the words settle. I told myself I was being strong, that I was handling it, that I didn't need anyone's help. I worked night shifts at a tire shop so I wouldn't have to see the guys I'd served with. I let my benefits lapse because the paperwork reminded me of who I used to be. I watched my daughter grow up from the margins of her life because I didn't think I deserved to be in the center of it. His eyes found Maisie in the front row. She was 7 now, her cardboard crown long since replaced by a real tiara that Kowalski had bought her for her birthday. Around her neck hung Damon's dog tags, too big for her small frame, resting against her chest like a promise. "I was wrong," Ezra said, "about all of it." He stepped out from behind the podium, moving closer to his audience. "The hardest thing I ever did wasn't the combat. It wasn't the kills. It wasn't holding my brother while he died. The hardest thing I ever did was admitting that I needed help, that I couldn't do it alone, that surviving isn't the same as living." A man in the second row wiped his eyes. His wife gripped his hand. 6 months ago, I took my daughter to family day on this base. I wore a tire shop shirt and boots held together with tape. And a general looked at me and decided I was nothing. He mocked me. He threatened me. He tried to have me arrested in front of my daughter. Ezra smiled slightly. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Confused murmurs rippled through the room. Because it forced me to stop hiding. It forced me to remember who I was. It forced me to let the people who loved me back into my life. That general's cruelty became the door I walked through to come home. He turned and gestured to the back of the room, where Admiral Reeves sat in civilian clothes, watching with quiet pride. Damon's mother told me something that day. She told me that her son wanted me to live, not to survive, not to exist, to live, to find something worth fighting for, to honor his memory by building something beautiful. His voice softened. I'm trying to do that now. Every day, with every veteran I talk to, every family I help navigate the system, Every kid I show that their parents' service matters. I'm trying to build something beautiful out of all this broken. He looked back at Maisie, and it started with a little girl who wanted to see the bounce houses. The room laughed, a release of tension, a moment of warmth. Ezra returned to the podium. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It's not. Some days, I still wake up reaching for a rifle that isn't there. Some nights, I still talk to Damon in the dark. Some mornings, I still expect to see Elena making coffee in the kitchen. His voice caught. But I'm here. I'm present. I'm trying. And that's all any of us can do. He straightened. If you're struggling, ask for help. If you're drowning, grab the hand that's reaching for you. If you think you don't deserve to heal, remember that the people who love you deserve to have you whole. His eyes swept the room. You serve your country. Let your country serve you back. That's not weakness. That's completing the mission. The applause started slowly, then built to a crescendo. Veterans rose to their feet. Families embraced. The sound washed over Ezra like a wave, like absolution, like coming home. After the session, Maisie ran to him and leaped into his arms. Did you help the sad people, Daddy? I hope so, sweetheart. He held her close. That's all we can do. They walked out of the compound together into the California sunshine. The base looked different now. Not like a place he didn't belong, but like a place that had been waiting for him to return. Admiral Reeves fell in a step beside them. You're good at this, she said. The speaking, the connecting. Damon would be proud. I talk to him sometimes, Ezra admitted. I tell him about the guys we're helping, the families we're reaching. I like to think he hears me. She smiled. I like to think so too. They reached the parking lot, where Vega and Blackwood and a dozen other operators waited. It had become a tradition, these gatherings after sessions. Barbecues and brotherhood, and children running through sprinklers while their parents remember how to laugh. Maisie squirmed in Ezra's arms. Can I go play with the other kids, Daddy? He set her down and watched her run toward a group of children, Damon's tags bouncing against her chest. She's going to be okay, Admiral Reeves said. Yeah. Ezra watched his daughter disappear into the crowd of kids. She is. And you? Ezra was quiet for a moment. Then he touched the tags around his own neck, Elena's initials and Damon's coordinates. The weight he had carried for so long now transformed into something else. Not a burden. A reminder. I'm getting there, he said. One day at a time. The sun was setting over Coronado, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. Somewhere closer, veterans shared stories and found pieces of themselves they thought they'd lost. Ezra Whitfield stood in the middle of it all. The ghost who had come back to life. The legend who had chosen to become a father. The broken man who was learning, slowly, to be whole. Still here, brother, he whispered to the evening air. Still here, Elena. And this time, we're not alone. Maisie's voice rang out across the gathering. Daddy, come play. Ezra smiled. The first real smile in longer than he could remember. Coming, sweetheart. He walked toward his daughter, toward the sound of laughter, toward the life that Damon had wanted for him and Elena had always believed he deserved. The tire shop shirt was gone, but the man who had worn it remained. Scarred. Standing. Finally home.